Hi, loves. So today I want to talk a little bit about pain and suffering. I made a video recently about pleasure, and I think if we're going to talk about pleasure, it's really important to also talk about pain, because pain and pleasure feel like two sides of the same coin, right? And for many of us in our modern world, we spend a lot of our life avoiding pain, running away from pain, looking away from pain. Whether that is our own pain, our own inner suffering, our own bodily pain, emotional pain, right? Or whether that's the pain of others, right? And this is so interesting because we also are living in a time where we are inundated with images, messages, and stories of global suffering on levels that have never been seen before, right? Because we have the internet and we all have little cameras in our pocket. And so we are able, as a species, right, as a human global family, to witness suffering at higher levels than we've ever witnessed before. And so it's really interesting, right, that as we are being called, right, to look upon suffering, to see suffering, we're also in a time when we are unable to hold it, right? We don't know, we don't have the tools to look at suffering, right? And I say this because, right, like in a lot of wisdom traditions, there is this knowing, right, or this prayer or this wish, right, that witnessing suffering will increase our compassion, right? Will open our hearts, right? This idea that seeing our pain, seeing other people's pain, honoring and recognizing the suffering will increase our ability to have compassion, will awaken our own heart. The flower of our heart will open, right? It will break our heart open, right? Some teachers say that is what grief does, right? Like grief is an expression of love because we don't feel grief if we don't feel love, right? And so when we grieve, we are expressing our love. We're allowing our love to crack open. We're allowing our love to be as big as the world. And so it's very similar with compassion and suffering, right? When we witness suffering and allow our hearts to open, right, the experience becomes different, right? And I say this because, like, it's really easy, I know on a personal level, to like witness the harms of the world and move into anger, right? To be really mad, to move into blaming, right? To move into like finger pointing. Oh, they did this or they did that, or if they just stopped this, then we could blah, blah, blah. And while I understand that is a protective tool, right? That is a strategy for me to cope, right, with the suffering. I've also found that it is much more useful, right, instead of sitting and staying in that place of anger and blame, right, to drop in to my own heart and feel into the way that this suffering, this horrendous thing that's happening is breaking my heart open in a way that isn't like debilitating. And I say that because I know a lot of people in this world think that if we are to feel our big feelings, if we are to sit with the pain, if we're to really look at the suffering, then it will like throw us into a pit that we can't climb out of, that it will drown us in a way that we can't recover. And while I totally understand why the like logical mind is scared of that, I also want to say that like we were made for this, right? Like we are literally like we are capable of like witnessing that suffering, right? And maybe we can't do it alone. Maybe we need a community. Maybe we need to sit in circle. Maybe we need a guide or a therapist or whoever, right? But like we are capable, and it's not just because of our individual capabilities, right? Part of this comes with that recognition of like us as like a part of a whole, right? That we are like one thread in the tapestry, one cup of the ocean, right? One vessel of spirit, whatever, kind of works for you to comprehend like our like individualness in the wholeness, but that like we're part of the whole. And I say that to say, right, that like for me at least, right, like working with the Reiki energy, this unconditionally loving energy, and working with like higher powers, right, has enabled me to build my capacity to hold my own pain, but also the pain of others, my own suffering, but also the suffering of others, right? Because when I reach out to a love that is infinite, when I reach out to a love that is bigger than all of us and also all of us, all of a sudden I'm not having to hold it alone. All of a sudden there is this larger compassionate love, right, that can hold me as I hold my pain or your pain or our pain, right? And so there's this invitation, right, the prayer of like, may this suffering awaken compassion, right? Like how are each of us, right, like inviting that mindful prayer into our own world, whether it is trying to show compassion to ourselves or show compassion to others, because really the way forward is for all of us to develop more compassion, right? Like we can't change what is changeable unless we are willing to approach it with a compassionate and loving heart, right? Because if we try to change what is changeable with closed hearts, we'll continue to create what has been created, right? A society that completely lacks compassion and heart, right? And so there is this invitation right now to really sit with our own pain, right? To really look at suffering, and not in a way that like keeps us in despair and keeps us in hopelessness, right? Because I think that's where a lot of us are getting lost, right? And the path, right, out of that kind of like lost, hopeless place is in our heart, right? It's in love. It's in the love that's bigger than all of us. It's in the love that is all of us. So suffering is here to teach us something, right? To help us become more compassionate, right? Pain is also here to teach us something. And as we know, right, like the largest trees that are reaching closest to the light also have their roots in the deepest and darkest places of the earth. And so we are invited, right, to root in to the pain, to the suffering, to the things that we run from, as a way to move closer to the light, right? Many of us understand this concept that like, right, like how much pleasure and like if pleasure and pain are intrinsically connected, then the amount of pleasure and pain that we experience are dependent on each other. So if we're cutting ourselves off from the pain that we want to avoid, we're also going to be cutting ourselves off from the pleasure that we can experience, right? If we are cutting ourselves off from our compassionate heart, right, and we are sitting and living in judgment, in blame, in criticism, right, we are cutting ourselves off from the fullness that life can be, right? Because as someone who is a recovering, like, hyper-judgmental, critical person, right, I can tell you that when I was living saturated in this like hyper-judgmental, both self-judgmental and judgmental of others, or hypercritical of self and hypercritical of others, I couldn't relate with people in the kind of like loving way that I can now. Why? Because I was always so self-conscious about the judgments, right, that I was having, but I projected them onto others and just assumed that everyone was judging me in the same way that I was judging them. And so I lived in this fear of being judged, this fear of being criticized. And I'll name too, right? Like, it's not like I've completely overcome that, right? This still is something that I am dancing with, that I think a lot of us are learning how to live with, right? Where it's like, can we bring compassion to that hyper judgment, right? Can we bring a little bit of love to that suffering that we're feeling inside, right? Because if we are berating ourselves, our inner mind is berating ourselves constantly, like that's hurtful, right? Like, could you imagine if you know, are a hypercritical person, like speaking that way to your loved ones, to your partner, to your friend, to your children, you know? It's like, many of us who are really critical to ourselves would never even like dare to be so cruel to other people. And yet we don't even question the cruelty that we show to ourselves, right? And so it's so important for any of us who are trying to kind of like move beyond past limitations, or trying to like create a better world, or like be better than we were the day before, right? To really start to find ways to befriend and sit with our pain. And now I say this, and I also want to name, right, that like, this isn't necessarily easy. This isn't necessarily comfortable. This isn't necessarily something that you should do on your own, right? Depending on the level of trauma and pain in your life. Like maybe this is the invitation to you to find a therapist or a guide, right? To help you to navigate how to kind of unearth like what deep kind of like unworthiness and fear and inner shame and pain is preventing you, right, from really being your full, brightest, biggest self, right? And then I also want to say too that like this doesn't necessarily have to be this like huge 10-year like project, right? That we can learn how to do this like very quickly, right? Like time is relative. And so there's an invitation to just be curious and gentle with yourself and start small, right? Like maybe this looks like, taking a few deep breaths with your discomfort before you self-soothe in whatever ways you self-soothe, right? Like maybe this is, setting a loving heart or loving hand on your heart and sending yourself some love and compassion the next time that like angry voice starts to berate you, right? Maybe this is a practice of like giving yourself a hug before you, numb out or move on, right? Because a lot of us are really, really good at avoiding pain, right? And most of us wouldn't even say that that's what we're doing, right? Like, but I think of like this whole, like I want to zone out in front of the TV, right? Like that is definitely like a like different language for saying that we're going to like numb out, avoid. And like, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? Like sometimes we need to like press pause and like kind of like let things regulate before we can like re-engage, and full permission, right? And sometimes we might begin to notice that those tools, right? That glass of wine, that cigarette, that smoke, whatever, right? Is not able to actually soothe us in the ways that we're longing to be soothed. And so the invitation here is just to get curious and to be willing to, ask that mindful prayer, right? Like, may this suffering awaken compassion, right? May this pain awaken love. May this suffering awaken compassion, right? May this pain show me the path towards love, right? Because real talk, like, we can't just keep avoiding the pain, the suffering, and think that it's going to go away, right? Like, as many of us know, like, if we don't tend to the wound, it will fester, it will infect, and it may lead to something worse, right? Like, having amputation, right? And so we understand that in many ways, but it is really hard to apply. It's really hard to sometimes take that own advice, especially when we've spent our whole life running from the uncomfortable and turning away from this pain that feels maybe unbearable, unforgivable, this pain that feels insurmountable, right? And I'm here to tell you, like, you've got this, right? Like, you were made for this. Like, our bodies are like uniquely designed to be able to like process so much pain and pleasure, right? Because I started this by talking about how pain and pleasure are like two sides of the same coin, right? The two sides of the DNA strand, right? Coming together, the polarities that come together to create life experience. And so as we build our capacity to sit with the pain that is calling out to us, our own inner suffering that's calling out to us, will also increase our capacity to feel the pleasures and enjoyments and joys of life, right? So let me see if I want to say anything else about that, but I do want to do a little energy healing and kind of dropping in to support us around this, because this is big work, right? Like, this isn't for the faint of heart, right? Like, there are many people on this planet who will live their whole lives running from and turning away from pain and suffering. And but the invitation is always there. The invitation is always there to root into that pain so that we can find some freedom, so that we can find some liberation, so that we can stretch even higher towards the light, right? Pain, as much as we might have been taught this, like, pain is not our enemy. Pain isn't even an indicator that something is wrong with us, right? Pain can sometimes just be something that's calling for our attention, something that wants us to notice, something that wants us to drop in, something that wants us to look, hear, feel, sense, right? With the goal of increasing our compassion, increasing our capacity for love, for acceptance, right? Because so many of us who live with chronic pain end up disassociating from the pain, right? Like, removing ourselves from it, right? That's how we survive, right? That's how we learn to manage it. And while yes, right, like, that can be a very helpful skill, in the long term, though, it won't make the pain dissipate. It won't make the pain go away, right? And so it is with conscious, loving intention that we allow pain to exist, whether in our bodies or in our world, that we not even like allow it to exist, right? Because that seems to say that we're somehow like have control, right? Because like pain, suffering is just like a natural part of the human experience, right? Like, it sucks to hear that, but like, it just is, right? Like, loss is just a part of life. Like, we will experience pain, right? And so trying to change the unchangeable will just convince us that we don't have the power to change anything. Because trying to change the fact that pain exists, we will fail. Because pain and suffering will exist, right? It exists. The invitation, right, is to stop running, right? To befriend, right? To accept this as a part of life, and to potentially reframe our perspective of it so that we can see it as a path towards freedom, a path towards liberation, a path towards love, a path towards compassion, right? A path towards even greater expressions of life, right? Because it's really hard to live a full life when we are constantly trying to run from or manage our pain. And while it might feel counterintuitive to sit with our pain, I think that's the invitation, right? That's the invitation. And so I am going to give you an opportunity now to accept and answer that invitation. And we're going to move into a little energy healing, just a little bit of an embodiment practice. I want you to remember that you are a sovereign being, right? So as we move into this practice, like take responsibility for your own healing, and enter this in a way that feels good for you, but also like maybe like put on that like beginner's mind cap, right? Where we are just willing to be curious. Yes. So I invite you to sway your body if that feels good, have some water if that feels good. And I'm going to call on the Reiki, that unconditional loving energy. I'm also going to call on the divine masculine and the sacred feminine. I'm going to call on the earth. I'm going to call on the cosmos, source, spirit to support us in this work as we take our first step towards seeing pain as a teacher, as honoring pain and the lessons it can bring us, as we maybe for the first time ever sit with instead of avoid or run from our pain. So I invite you to take a few deep breaths here. And as you breathe in, I want you to imagine that you can breathe in loving life force energy into your body. And as you breathe out, I want you to just release any resistance that you feel. Breathing in some of that nourishing life force energy into our body. Breathing out, just settling into this moment. One more deep breath in here, breathing in. Breathing out, relaxing into this experience. And then in a way that feels good for you, I want you to just let your awareness start to drop into your physical body. We're going to start with doing a body scan. And so as I begin to name different body parts, I invite you to continue breathing and just let your awareness scan, move over, and become aware of your physical body. The intention here is not to change anything. The intention here is not to judge. The intention is just to become aware. To become aware again of these bodies of ours. So we'll start at the top of our head, bringing our awareness to the crown of our head, the top of our head. Letting that awareness start to melt down the sides of our head, towards our ears, down the front of our face, our forehead, to the space around our eyes, our eye sockets, to our eyes themselves. Letting that awareness drop down our temples and our cheeks towards our jaw. Dropping down the front of our face towards our nose, our cheekbones, our lips and our chin. Feeling that awareness move down our back body, down the back of our head towards our neck. Letting that awareness drop down our back body, down our neck and our shoulders, our shoulder blades, down our ribs, our spine, down all the way to our hips. Just becoming aware again of our back body. Bring our awareness back up towards our throat, moving our awareness down our front body, down our neck and our chest, down our ribs and our bellies, all the way down towards our pelvis and our hips. Breathing here, letting that breath move all the way down into your hips, into your pelvis, down into your belly. We'll bring our awareness once more up to our necks and allow that awareness to move down our side bodies, down the sides of our necks, our shoulders and our arms, all the way down. Ooh, our biceps towards our elbows, down towards our wrists, down to the tips of each of our fingers, our thumb, our pointer finger, our middle finger, our third finger, and our pinky. Bringing that awareness to our palms, feeling that awareness move back up to our arms, all the way to our armpits, feeling the awareness of our underarms. Letting that awareness drip down the sides of our body, feeling awareness of our side body, our ribs, the sides of our waist and our hips. Dropping that awareness down towards our hips, feeling the full inside, right? Feeling the inside of our body. Letting that awareness start to drop down our legs. Dropping into our knees, down our calves, towards our ankles, and the tops of our feet, and the bottoms of our feet. Breathing here, I invite you to become aware of your wholeness, breathing into the edges of your entire body now. Take 2 more breaths here, feeling into the wholeness of our body, becoming aware of our whole self. And from this place of deep inner awareness, I am sure that you have begun to notice some sensations. Maybe they feel uncomfortable or unfamiliar, and I honor your willingness to notice them, to become aware of them. So if any point, any of these feelings in your body begin to feel too much, I invite you to maybe open your eyes and re-presence yourself to your physical environment, taking your awareness, modulating your awareness to your outer world before diving back in. I invite you also to play with the mantra. I honor this suffering. I honor my suffering. I honor this suffering of mine. And feel free to keep repeating that mantra. Maybe you want to place hands on your heart or place hands on somewhere in your body that is feeling intense. Sometimes just being willing to honor the suffering is enough to feel some dissipation, some relief. And remember, the point here isn't to change anything that we're feeling. It's merely to honor it, to accept it, to face it, right? There's nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with you. All of your body's sensations, be them pleasurable or painful, are completely normal and allowed. Maybe you might try playing with the mantra or the affirmation. I honor this pain that I feel. I honor this pain that I feel. I am willing to honor this pain that I feel. I am willing to honor this pain. Continue to breathe here. And maybe as you inhale, you invite love to hold those areas of your body that might be feeling high sensation. And on your exhale, maybe you imagine that you are giving this pain over to a higher source to be held, giving it to the earth, giving it into love, giving it into source or whatever deity feels appropriate, right? Breathing in, feeling love hold the sensation in your body. Breathing out, allowing a higher presence to hold that pain, releasing it a little bit. Now, from this place, you can continue to just breathe here, repeating to yourself, I am willing to honor this pain. I honor this suffering. Just repeating that, just the willingness, right? Just being willing. And maybe you also feel ready to receive a message from this sensation, from this pain. And so if you are, I'll invite that pain to speak. What is it you wish us to be aware of? What are you trying to show us, teach us, tell us? What message do you have for me now? Continuing to breathe and just being willing to receive whatever comes up, be that images, colors, sensation, words, memories, just allowing those stories to unfold. What message do you have for us, pain? What are you trying to teach us, show us, tell us? And then for whatever came up from this place, whatever came up, whether it was nothing or something very profound, I invite you to send some thanks and gratitude towards those sensations, towards that pain. Thank you. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your lessons. And as we breathe here, I'll invite you to maybe bring your awareness to a place just above the crown of your head. Or maybe you want to bring your awareness down into the ground, like you have roots below you. Just letting your awareness modulate away from the high intensity, the sensation, the pain. Rooting into the ground or moving into that higher self point. Or maybe you feel yourself stretching into both. I'll invite you to place your hands maybe on your heart in a prayer position if that feels right for you, or just in your lap. As we breathe and recite this mindful prayer, either out loud or in your mind's eye. May this pain awaken compassion. May this suffering awaken compassion. May this pain lead me closer to love. May this suffering awaken compassion. I'll invite the Reiki energy now to flow through each of us. Flowing through our physical bodies, our mental bodies, our emotional bodies, our energetic bodies, our spiritual bodies. Inviting in this unconditionally loving presence to move through our physical form, our energetic form, and just bring some softening. Inviting this Reiki to hold those points of high intensity, those points of pain within us. Inviting the Reiki to hold those with love, knowing that we do not need to do this alone, knowing that there are higher forces here to support us, And as this Reiki energy, this loving energy moves through our physical form, allowing it, trusting it to flow where it is most needed for our highest good and our highest self and our deepest healing, trusting that Reiki to do this work without us having to direct it or instruct it in any way. I'll invite you to begin presencing yourself once again in your physical space. So maybe you want to start moving your body. Maybe you want to blink some light back into your eyes. Maybe you want to look around, see where you are, notice colors, notice shape, notice light. Maybe you want to look out the window if there is one. Maybe you want to gaze up at the sky and remember the vastness. And as you presence yourself, I invite you to imagine that anything that arose from you here that doesn't need to be carried with you for the remainder of your day, just simply wash off of you into the earth. Be released down into the roots, anything that's ready for release, anything that's not in service to your highest good and deepest healing. Releasing that completely. And I'll invite you to just send some love to yourself here. Send some gratitude to yourself here. This is big work that you are embarking on. This is not for the faint of heart. And practices like this can sometimes bring some alleviation to pain and suffering we may be feeling. But it can also stir things up, right? And so I invite you to really be gentle with yourself. I invite you to reach out to, loved ones, support systems. And I also invite you to really be gentle with yourself, right? Like, in a world that tends to teach us to avoid and run away from pain, it is a very brave thing to make a conscious choice to sit with our pain, to learn from our pain. And so I invite you to really let that sink in, the strength and courage and bravery that you are showing by your willingness to sit with your sensation, by your willingness to come home to the body, regardless of how painful that may be. This is big work. And if you feel like you want some support around this, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is below. You can schedule a free call with me. I am a energy healer, life coach, a divine channel, and I am here to help us come home to the body. And part of coming home to the body is learning how to befriend our pain, learning how to befriend our pain. And for many of us who have avoided our body for most of our life, there may be some deep tending that needs to happen as we come home. An analogy I like to share with some of my clients is, for those of us who've been living disassociated from our body and disconnected from our body, coming home to our body is as if we're coming home to a house that has been unkept for years, right? And we are now invited to clean up the cobwebs, to dust, to repaint, to tend, right? That this home of ours, right, maybe has been disheveled and ignored, but that we have the power and the capacity to tend these spaces, and that there are people on this planet who delight in supporting you to come home to this body of yours, to learn the lessons that pain has for you, for us, so that we can live fuller and bigger and brighter lives, so that we can have access to all of the pleasures and the joys that are available to us, instead of staying stuck in our suffering and trying to run from the pain. We get to embrace all that this human experience has to offer us. And so if you'd like some support in this, please reach out to me. We aren't meant to do this alone. And having loving and compassionate support on this path can just create exponential healing and help us feel like we're not alone. So I hope that this resonated with you. Let me know if you have any questions or what came up for you during that. And I'm sure I'll be speaking about this more. Bye now.